Hey, everybody. Right at 8 o'clock. Welcome to Narrative Live. We are very excited to have our first post-Mueller report show. The last one was fun rock and roll style television as we broadcast the entire Mueller report while we were reading it and discovering things. But now we have a special show tonight about the next step, we believe, in the process could be impeachment. Hello, Tracy. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Zev. Welcome back, everybody, to Narrative Live. And again, we're on Zev's Periscope tonight, and I will be monitoring it. And we really hope to get some feedback from you guys because we have a great guest tonight. We really wanted to take some time to explain the impeachment process. And Zev, you've been calling for impeachment since April 1st. As a reaction to the release of the redacted Mueller report. So Can you let's take a look at your tweet from April 1st here.
Well, that was when we still had only the Barr report, if you remember that stage in this process. And I said,
that's right.
I was responding to something Glenn Kirshner, we all respect a lot, from MSNBC, and I said the impeachment train has left the station with Barr's memo and is en route to Congress. The founders anticipated this issue would land up in impeachment trial. We should follow their guidance, and I believe we are sort of in that realm right now as we're heading into a lot of debate about whether the impeachment process should be started now or later, or whether we already are in the impeachment process by a very different name. And the first thing we wanted to do is assure everyone that impeachment doesn't have to compete with the 2020 elections. Yes, we have an election next year. We can have an impeachment alongside it. And we'll explain that as we go through the show today.
Yeah, and Pelosi's strategy, Zev, it appears to make a 2020 a referendum on Donald Trump. And she stated that. We know because she said in her response to McConnell, he said, we wanted to make this about socialism. And she said, well, we're going to make this a referendum of Donald Trump.
I think that's such an important point today. And, today she was honored at the Time 100. This is after a conference call she had with her caucus yesterday. At the Time 100, she was pretty forceful about why she believes this is the right road to take. Let's take a listen and look at what she said.
That the Russians had a systemic overall assault on our electoral system. And what we also did see is that the President of the United States engaged in behavior that was unethical, unscrupulous, and beneath the dignity of the office that he holds. What's surprising about it is that the Republicans seem to have an unlimited appetite for this kind of behavior, and instead of being ashamed of what that report said, they gave their blessing once again to the president. That's what I thought of it so far.
Do you believe the president committed obstruction of justice? Do you believe that in addition to being unethical, the president's behavior was criminal?
That remains to be seen when we see the rest of the report.
And what she goes on to say is that, we haven't yet seen the entire report, and that's showing just a less redacted version to a selection of members of Congress, and the Senate is not going to actually do it for her. She wants everyone to see the unredacted reports. That's the next fighting stage here. But it is interesting that we've already had hearings being scheduled by Jerry Nadler's Judiciary Committee. And some of them include Don McGahn, which just came out today, that he's being subpoenaed, the former the in-house counsel for the White House. And he's there to talk about obstruction. So that's all very interesting in terms of understanding where we are on the road to impeachment.
Right. And it's kind of like, let's think of it this way, Zev. Are the hearings that are already being scheduled, are they impeachment hearings without technically calling them impeachment hearings? And don't forget, we already had over 80 people and entities who have been subpoenaed by Nadler's committee. So there's some serious investigation already going on.
So impeachment by any other name, is it still impeachment? It could well be, because they don't have to go down that road of calling it impeachment until they actually pass the articles of impeachment. Now, we're joined today by our good friend, Professor Gary Darden, who is from Fairleigh Dickinson University in New Jersey. He's a professor of modern history and all sorts of amazing things. Welcome, Gary. Welcome to Narrative Live.
Hello, how are you all?
Great, Gary. Well. Thanks. Welcome.
So are we seeing the foundations of an impeachment process here just being masked by these other hearings?
Well, I think the House is going to need more information. I think you mentioned they're going to need to get the rest of the report, even if it's unredacted, into a select number of members. They're going to hold highly public hearings in which people whose testimony is in the report are going to have to speak in front of cameras and in front of microphones. This is really premier television to actually hear the voices of people saying what the president has done in the realm of sort of obstruction of justice. Then what they're going to do is they'll attempt to build up a case. They will very, very carefully monitor public opinion polls and see whether or not they should move forward with this.
So this is more of a wait and see strategy in some ways. They're going to test the market as things come out.
Yes, which is what happened in the Nixon when the Senate put together Watergate hearings, and Nixon took office in the second term with 68% approval ratings. Once the Watergate hearing committee began, it fell down into the 30s. Then it fell down into the 20s. His lowest rating the day he left office was 24%. Trump's never been above 45%. He went from 44% to 39% when the Mueller report was released. I suspect as we start hearing testimony and seeing more evidence, it's going to go down further.
We have seen him lose a little bit of support. We're now at 37%. So that base is beginning to crack a little, but it's still going to crack a lot more, I think, before we get to see the majority of his base, even some of its base, thinking that impeachment is necessary.
I think his solid base, if Nixon, even the day Nixon left office, smoking gun and all, one quarter of the public was still with him. So I think Trump will always have at least one quarter, if he's lucky, 1/3. That's not what you want to go into a 2020 race, having those kind of.
Yeah. Can I ask a question? I think what's really going to make a difference here is and I hate to say it, is Fox News going to broadcast these hearings? Because the people who really need to hear those voices are getting their news from Fox.
I think that's a very good question, because in the Watergate hearings, about 3/5 of the American public listened to Walter Cronkite every night, regardless of race, region, or class. And they believe that this professional journalist with CBS News was delivering vetted news. You don't get that perspective. So I think Fox's role in this campaign.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I mean, I think they sort of have to. It's a national event when these things happen. But if they're Judiciary Committee hearings, they might be downgraded in the opinion of Fox News' executives. If it was a full impeachment hearing, they might be more inclined to. But my bet is that they also have to bring their public along, and they can't ignore the world as it happens. But who knows? They've been doing it so far. Gary, sorry, go ahead, Tracy. You were about to say something?
I was just going to say that I really wanted Gary to kind of go through with us the process of how impeachment works, because I know for me, it will be very educational.
And Gary, we have a slide. Sorry, go ahead.
Looking their news from social media, which can be tampered with, what Russia did, that's another fact. As far as the impeachment, people have to realize that it takes a simple majority in the House to pass an article of impeachment. So the Judiciary Committee will review, hopefully when all the testimony is done, they're going to have a discussion. If a majority of that committee is willing to pass one or more articles of impeachment, it goes to the floor of the House. So the most likely articles, I think, would be obstruction of justice and abuse of power. Those would be the two most.
We have a little slide anticipating what you were going to say, because we were planning ahead, and we're going through the road to impeachment here. And you've indicated that the House Judiciary Committee is the committee that compiles the articles.
Yes, that's the committee of first review. So what they're going to do is they're going to look at the evidence and then decide whether or not there is enough to recommend to the full floor a vote on an article. Let's just say again, obstruction of justice. It then goes to the full House. If a majority of the House, by majority vote, votes on any of those articles, the president stands impeached. Now remember, impeachment is a political act. It is not a criminal. It is not a criminal trial. Just the way Kavanaugh was a job interview for Kavanaugh. It wasn't a criminal trial about his alleged conduct. So if it goes to the full House and they vote, let's say obstruction of justice, it then has to go to the Senate. Now the Senate requires a supermajority, requires 2/3 of members present. And this trial is presided over by the Chief Justice, in this case, Roberts. The 100 senators, or however many attempt to show up, serve in silence as jurors. They cannot speak or ask questions.
That's so interesting.
I did not know this. I find it really interesting.
Silence as jurors. Each side, so basically, the Senate Democrats and the Senate House Democrats will put together a legal team to make a case. And there's any number of lawyers, great lawyers, that would love to be on this case.
I want to see Adam Schiff go.
We discussed that, Tim. I'm like, can we have Adam Schiff, please?
At the time, the Senate Republicans and/or Trump can put together their dream legal team, and they will attempt to make their case. Bill Clinton had used a powerful former senator and mentor from Arkansas who did a blisteringly beautiful.
Can I just interrupt? We've seen so far what Trump's legal dream teams look like. So I'm just going to throw that out there.
That would not be. So once all the evidence is presented, then the Senate will go in to basically serve as a jury, after which they can attempt to speak yay or nay after the trial is over, and then they're going to have a vote. If 67 senators, that's 2/3, vote for one or more article impeachment, the president is removed from office immediately. That's never happened.
Immediately, like right then, right that second.
Andrew Johnson, 1868, again, you could hear a pen drop in the Senate. A freshman senator from Kansas destroyed his career and voted not guilty. And Andrew Johnson kept his presidency by one vote in the Senate.
Wow.
Are you serious? I didn't realize it was only one vote. Oh, wow.
John Kennedy's Profiles in Courage, promising rising Republican, slit his own throat. But I think at the time he did the right thing. So in 1974, the House Judiciary Committee had passed, were moving articles of impeachment to the floor of the House. So at that
Don't go to Nixon yet. Don't go to Nixon yet. I'm going to stop you there because I want to. I know you're dying to, but there's lots to talk about in Nixon. I want to just back up a little bit here because the Chief Justice you mentioned was interesting, but it is interesting that it's the Senate and not the Supreme Court that's the ultimate arbiter. Even though the Supreme Court justice is there, it's not him. It's not the entire court that's presiding over it. And I happen to be reading, because as one does in preparation for these kind of shows, the Federalist Papers and Hamilton's Federalist paper on this. And he's quite interesting. He says that the reason that it's the Senate is because the same person might still have to go through the criminal system afterwards, and they can't be judged by the same court. So this really is a political event, not a criminal event. And that's something you just mentioned earlier. So I think that's important for people to remember. We're not judging his criminality. We're judging something else. And can you explain to us a little bit of what those things are that we're judging?
Well, there's deliberate vagueness in the Constitution where they're talking about as high crimes and misdemeanor. That can mean a lot, but it's based on political judgment. You can say that Bill Clinton did perjure himself, but he perjured himself over private sexual affair. And the Senate, not even by majority, was willing to accept any of those charges. I think it's more spelled out far more clearly for Nixon. We'll come back to that. And I think
if you need to go there, you can. I'm just trying to direct this.
hint. We have a bunch more coming up on Nixon.
Yeah.
Charges are very pervasive because Nixon's problem was ordering the cover-up. He did not order the Watergate break-in. Trump has been involved from the word go in this issue with the Russian investigation, firing Comey, wanting the special prosecutor fired. His staff did their job and prevented it. And so there's a lot more evidence here. And I really think that the American people are going to need to see the people, names fall silent in the report, hear them speak to the microphone. Mm-hmm. The Watergate Committee back in 73, 74 was brilliant at pulling this narrative, this dialogue out of these men under oath. And people were watching the Watergate hearings 10 hours in a block. Right. So I think the House has the ability to do what the Senate Watergate Committee did. And per what you said, it won't happen overnight. This is something that could literally stretch into the rest of the year and set the stage for 2020.
So in Watergate, did they have the hearings at the Judiciary Committee first? But they never had an impeachment trial. So it was all Judiciary Committee hearings. Is that true?
Set up a Watergate Committee.
Yeah. Okay.
And that group is the one that began to basically pull the testimony from these individuals. And it was very slow. So May from 73 into October is when things started to get bad regarding the news of the tapes. Mm. And that's when Nixon, the Saturday Night Massacre in October 73, is when Nixon fired all these people. Basically, Nixon did what Trump wanted to do, but his legal team, from Jeff Sessions to McGahn, basically would not do it. And so when the Senate Watergate hearings opened up, is when Nixon, who was at 68% on Inauguration Day 73, by May he fell below 50%. The night of the Saturday Massacre, he fell below 30% and never went back above it.
Wow.
Ever.
Wow.
The rest of
So I want to take a I think we lost you. Are you still there? Yeah.
I
silent
can
on
hear
us.
him. I'm not
Oh.
sure if everybody else
Okay.
can hear him.
Can you say something to me, Gary? So I know I haven't lost you.
You hear me?
Yes, I can. All right. So here's the something we call terms of impeachment, which is the rules are different. This is not a court case. This is different, right? And we've got a preponderance of evidence versus the reasonable doubt as a threshold, as a measure for what is considered guilty or not. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between those two? Because they seem quite vast, really, at the end of the day, between the criminal system and the political system.
Well, I mean, treason and bribery and high crimes, those seem pretty obvious. The catchphrase is misdemeanors, because, some people see misdemeanors as, jaywalking across the street. So misdemeanors is deliberately vague. Treason, I think, has obvious implications. Abuse of power has obvious implications. And high crimes would be things that would have criminal charge implications outside of office.
But the preponderance of evidence versus reasonable doubt, I mean, they seem, a preponderance of evidence is what? The majority of the evidence or a substantial amount of evidence. And reasonable doubt would mean nothing about it, can even you can have no doubt about any of the findings.
Preponderance means there literally is, again, the smoke. And what we had with Nixon with the tapes was the smoking gun, that he actually did blatantly agree and order the cover-up. What we have is the Mueller report suggests that there is evidence of obstruction, but not enough for him to recommend anything beyond what the Justice Department will do. What Mueller really does, he is teeing up, he's done his job. He is teeing up the House to do their job. The House may do their job, they may not do their job. If they tee up an impeachment and pass it, then they're handing it over to the Senate. And at that point, the Senate and its leadership would be responsible for the fate of the impeachment articles.
Zev, can I just interrupt for 1 second? Because I've got a couple people on Periscope that have brought up a really good point. And that is that the White House's refusal, say, for instance, the gentleman who oversaw Jared Kushner's security clearance. This is becoming a real issue yesterday and today, that they're refusing to let this guy testify even after he was subpoenaed. So wouldn't that be, something that would be an impeachable offense right there?
Well, it's obstructing justice. Congress has the right to subpoena officials. Now, they could say they refuse to testify. Again, whenever there is a conflict between the legislative and the executive branch, just like when Nixon wouldn't release the tapes, the courts had to decide this. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court was unanimous. I'm pretty sure any debate regarding executive power, if it went to this court, would not be a slam dunk. I really think that Roberts may be the deciding vote.
It's really interesting to see how Roberts is going to be so important in this whole process over the next few years. But this is one of the cases, but also in the impeachment trial, if that ever happens. Before I leave that one slide, and then
can we just go back to that slide?
Yes. Which, let me see if I can pull it up here, because all of this. There you go. Let's take a look at this one. This slide.
That slide, Zev. You found something really interesting, and it's the last two words on this slide, and I give you credit. You found it. Can we address that?
Yeah, because Gary,
tax evasion.
Is that an actual, impeachable offense if they discover that about Trump?
Where did this quote come from?
This comes from the Wikipedia page, so maybe it's wrong, but I think this is how it listed all the different high crimes and misdemeanors. Content. So it could be
lower three lines is a straight from the
that took out a couple of repeated things where it might have said a couple of things might have been repetitive, but it's basically it was straight from there.
But okay, so the tax evasion, I think also the emolument clause of the Constitution, right? Every time a foreign diplomat checks in Trump Hotel in DC, he is making money. Now, whether that can be how that is handled by the House, or right now it's being tested in the courts, refusal to obey a lawful order. That goes back to what you've just said. Chronic intoxication, we probably wish that was the issue with him, but it's not. And the issue of tax evasion is going to come from his, if we get those, his tax returns. Right now, Congress is attempting, the House rather, various committees are trying to get his tax returns. They're trying to get people to testify. They're trying to get an unredacted report sent to select members of the House. And to the extent to which the executive branch refuses to cooperate, will have to probably be tested and played out in the courts.
And it could even be an obstruction of justice if they don't hand over those tax returns because of this particular rule. It could be that they're obstructing an impeachment proceeding based on that tax evasion.
And this is where Trump is playing into the narrative. By saying things like this is executive harassment, he's trying to create a narrative with the conservatives, and he's trying to create talking points for Fox News and Republicans so that if they ever get to a point where they simply, let's say, refuse to have a trial, or if the Supreme Court judges decide to say, you don't have the power to do this, they're creating a narrative. That's one thing Trump's very good. He's very good at creating a narrative, a distracting.
Absolutely.
With little catchphrases.
Zeb, we put out a call also on our Twitter from our friends and subscribers if they had any questions ahead of time. And there was a really good question from Fran. And she asked, can McConnell block a trial in the Senate? I've heard both yes and no. And I think you might have an answer for us.
So I teach U.S. political history, but my department I share with some marvelous political scientists. So I've poked their brains at lunch today. And I'm going to quote, under current Senate rules, it looks like the Senate would have to take up impeachment, but McConnell could change those rules with a majority vote at any time.
Wow.
So that would be the key. Now, here's where people like Romney and Susan Collins, there are enough Republicans that are either very much purists of the Constitution or are moderates in danger in the 2020 election, which may not be willing to give McConnell a move on that. I don't think any of the Democrats would support McConnell for that.
Yeah, and you'd think a lot of Republicans wouldn't either, but I've been betting against them doing a lot of things, and they keep doing them. So it would be interesting to see if they don't allow him. A lot of their jobs are on the line too if impeachment goes ahead.
Yeah, and McConnell had no problem changing the rules when it came to Judge Garland. So I mean, it is a very good question.
It's a great question. It's certainly plausible. It would be jaw-dropping to see that deliberate abuse of an explicit clause in the Constitution. But again, if we have a trial in the Senate, all it takes is 34 Republicans to say nay, and Trump remains in office.
Right. So they could still use that very much to their advantage and get there. I've been looking at Romney and I've been looking at Collins, but beyond those two, there are not many others that are even showing any shift in their opinions here. Are there any others that you see in the Senate that might flip into a yay side?
Actually, sadly, no, because Corker's gone, Jeff Flake is gone. You know what? Take it back. Ben Sass of Nebraska.
Oh yeah, interesting. I've always looked at some of the older guard as well, but I don't see that happening. I used to believe Lindsey Graham was more liberally inclined, but he certainly has not shown himself to be that lately.
But I think in the cloakroom, keep in mind, if Trump's approval ratings continue to slide into the 20s, that is a danger zone for the Republicans up and down the ticket in 2020. And I can tell you there's going to be historic cloakroom chatter with Romney, Sass, some of the other people in the Senate saying, you realize that our dignity's on the line here. And
where has their dignity been this whole time? I'm sorry. That's a legitimate question.
I would agree.
Legitimate.
Real issue is there are enough Republicans like that believes they've jumped in bed with Trump. They're going to have to rip the Band-Aid off and bleed a bit and lose an election to step back and repair the party of Lincoln. Because if Trumpism continues to win elections, the party that was the party that was Eisenhower and Nixon, it's dead. We go through one of the handful of genuine party realignments in the U.S.
I would also ask if democracy would be dead at that point.
Well,
I think that's a fair question, but these questions were being asked in the 60s, in the Great Depression, during Reconstruction, the antebellum crisis. So we've been through dire moments where corruption and street violence and lack of confidence in the system appear to be reaching a breaking point. I think what you're saying is not out of bounds or impossible. I'd like to think the system has enough durable sanity. And senators tend to find their moral high ground if they see that their party's about to get crushed in the elections. If Trump becomes a painful liability, there may be just enough Republicans to step up and say enough.
Zev, we have one more Periscope question I really want to
Yeah,
ask and interject
go
if
for
I
it.
can.
Yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
it's, forgive me, rough 123, I think is the handle. And it's a great question. We've been talking about it. The timing of these proceedings are everything, because say all of the hearings were finished right at the election and Trump wins re-election, but say, we take back the Senate or we have enough votes in the Senate, he could be impeached after he's reelected.
He could be impeached after he's elected. It also depends on what the makeup of the Senate is. If the whole impeachment scandal, even if the Senate doesn't, avoids trying him or does it or won't issue a ruling or issue a vote, they just delay the vote in perpetuity. A new Senate could come around in 2021. And what I don't know is you've got a new makeup in the Senate. Do you have to issue a new trial?
That's a really good question, and it's part of the chess game. And maybe you wait until after the election to even pass the articles of impeachment, but you still have the hearings all the way until then to influence the election.
Give you a clarifying wrinkle that my colleague today. Trump survives the impeachment trial, but he's defeated in the election. But then Trump says this election is corrupt. There were illegal immigrants voting. I refuse to surrender my office. And what the Republicans could do if they still control the Senate is refuse to ratify the electoral vote. This would throw the election back into Congress.
What happens then when you say throw the election back into Congress?
This happened in 1876 when it was Tilden versus Hayes. There was massive voter fraud in the South. No one had an electoral majority. Several votes were disputed. And what Trump could do is say, this is a corrupt election. I'm not going to hand over the office. And this could get thrown into Congress because the electoral college votes have to be ratified by the House and by the Senate. If a Republican Senate refuses to ratify them, we have an unprecedented constitutional crisis.
Wow, that is fascinating. And I hope he's not listening because you may have given him a good idea.
Or anyone on his staff. No.
You actually cut out a little bit, Gary, there. For some reason, the audio keeps dropping. So we didn't hear what you said. Say that again.
I said, when I heard this at lunch today with my political science colleagues, I almost dropped my fork because I'm like, are you kidding me? Because there's like one more wrinkle in the sheets.
Well,
Yeah.
there are several people who have stated that they are afraid that even if he lost, he wouldn't leave the White House. So, I mean, it's not that much of a stretch to believe.
Or he
Sorry, go ahead. Speaking of impeachment in the sheets, or sorry, what did you call it? A wrinkle in the sheets, an impeachment in the sheets. This leads to a very funny joke that we've been setting up, which I've obviously just ruined. But
you did ruin the joke.
But it's time to talk about Dick.
And I want to say this to the television audience. I made my mistakes, but in all of my years of public life, I have never profited from public service. I've earned every cent. And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
President?
Yes, sir.
I am not a crook. We've had similar lines being said by the current office. I hate using the word President Donald Trump, but I would say the current person who lives at 1600 Pennsylvania, and he's been saying the same kind of things. He's been saying this is all a witch hunt. This is not real, and it certainly sounds a lot like what Nixon was saying back then when he was talking about not being a crook. That was a defining moment in history, wasn't it?
I mean, it's very defining. The thing is, Nixon was actually a brilliant, other than Watergate, brilliant politician and a master diplomat. He brought to all skill sets. I wouldn't have voted for him. And if I teach Watergate, students leave the room crying because it was so, horrific. But yeah, I mean, Watergate, when I went in starting being a teacher, I thought, we're not going to repeat Vietnam, repeat Watergate. We've all gotten smarter. We haven't gotten smarter. We got Iraq and we have Trumpism. And how we get out of this, Watergate will inform us, but it doesn't mean that we're going to go down the same path. Nixon was forced to resign. I don't see Trump reaching a point where resignation is an ultimate form of personal humiliation. And this is not a man that can accept defeat mistakes, let alone stand up in front of a camera and toss the keys to Pence.
And he's also, he's been a criminal for most of his life. This is his one way out of being thrown into jail. So he'll do everything he can for himself and his family to hold on to this office, because that's his way out.
That's a great point, Zeb, which it means he is going to fight like crazy for that 2020 election.
Yeah, and through any impeachment hearings. So let's take a look at what happened with Nixon, and maybe you can walk us through this timeline. I know it's the first time you sing it in this form, but you know it pretty well. And we looked at the "I'm not a crook" statement that happened in November '73. He had just won re-election in '72, and tell us what happens after that and how long it took to go from "I'm not a crook" to actually Nixon resigning.
Well, November '73 is the previous month in October is when the Saturday Night Massacre, in which Nixon just cleaned house with the special prosecutor and the Justice Department to remove the people that were pressing for the investigation. So flash forward to the next month, he's going on TV telling the public, "I'm not a crook." And we go through the holidays and we get into February, and now the House begins to look at the investigation. You already had the Senate investigation. April '74, the edited tapes are released. They then demand the full tapes. Nixon refuses. It goes to the courts. The Supreme Court then that summer orders the tapes to be released. Now, what's released in July '74 are the tapes with minutes missing. The famous, I think it was 18 minutes are missing from the tapes. But in those tapes is where there is a recording Nixon ordering the cover-up. That is the smoking gun. And the congressman for the part in California where Nixon was from tearfully goes on TV and begins to say the president needs to leave office. He's lost his own congressman. What you have from July into August is this kabuki between the Senate and the House. What Nixon is hoping is that he can survive a trial in the Senate. And what happens is several senior leaders, the Senate Republicans, among them Barry Goldwater, go into the Oval Office and tell Nixon, "You're not going to win the trial and you don't even have my vote." And it's that meeting with the Senate Republicans to say you are going to be removed from office that leads Nixon to make the decision that he's going to resign from office. And he resigns, effective noon the next day. He hands the speech in the East Room to his staff. He boards the helicopter. Ford takes the oath of office, and Nixon goes off into exile. But even like I said, the day he leaves office, 24% of the public was for him.
So interesting, because I think a lot of people bake in the fact that they know that Trump is a criminal. They know he probably worked with Russia. This is stuff that his base is well aware of. They're probably okay with it, and they'll be okay with it until he's left office.
Well, one thing that's interesting is you have to look at what his public opinion polls, but another thing to look at whether the president should be removed from office. So Gallup was asking a question, should the president be impeached and compelled to leave the presidency? It wasn't until basically the summer of 1974 that a majority of the public wanted him to leave office. And the day he resigned, 57% of the American public wanted him to be removed from office. But that means, nearly a little over 2/5 did not. So
Right.
Two things. Look at if we follow the Nixon model, I would look at his approval ratings, if and when they fall below 30% and stay there. And the other thing is, what percentage of Americans believe he should be both impeached and then tried and removed from office? If that number, if approval goes way into the 20s and we get a supermajority for those pushing for removal from office, then you're going to see the survival instinct kick in of Senate Republicans, particularly in states that are blue or purple.
Yeah, those moderate Republicans are going to be under pressure, of course, to keep their jobs.
Can I just point out one main difference from what you just said is that there was a smoking gun. There were those 18 minutes. We might not have a smoking gun with Trump to send those approval ratings down like they did in the 70s.
Well, what you had in Nixon was you had Dean saying there's a cancer in the presidency. So Dean testifies and said the president knew all about this. Cohen said Trump knew all about this. But from Dean's testimony until the tapes, it was he said. It was the president's word versus a disgruntled fired aide. And right now, Cohen is playing the role of disgruntled fired aide that's going to go to federal prison, just like John Dean. What we need is, ideally, would be some sort of a smoking gun, but there is no taping device in the White House. What it could be is a critical mass of firsthand testimony that the president's been involved in this. This could also end up being if someone had a taped phone call. This could
From
be.
what I understand, Michael Cohen taped a lot of phone calls, so that's not out of the question.
Also, you know, the president's phone was a hacker's dream. Apparently, every foreign government has been able to hack into the president's phone. It's quite possible his own government was hacking into the same phone and under investigation, trying to follow what he's saying.
Number two at the FBI that was Deep Throat that brought down. So I guarantee you there are a lot of people at the FBI and the CIA, EIA, and the NSA who don't like what Trump is doing to law and order and America's national security. So you could have elements in those four key agencies that are willing to provide sufficient evidence that could lead to a smoking gun.
There was also
take one for the team.
Well, take one for the country. But there's a lot to be said about Dean and McGahn being very comparable in some ways. I mean, those both were White House counsel. I think Dean was the White House counsel, wasn't he? Or was he a senior advisor? But either way, they both have an inside view of what's going on, and the McGahn hearing is coming up soon.
I think McGahn, because McGahn is he's sort of like the legal version of Mueller. He is a straight arrow conservative. We now know that he essentially refused to follow through on some of the orders from Trump. If anyone I think has the potential to be a Dean testimony, it's going to be McGahn. Problem with Cohen is like right out of central casting from The Sopranos. He's a New York lawyer. So right off the bat, he's not going to have the same kind of weight. But McGahn is a career federal lawyer.
We're getting reporting already that the White House is trying to stop McGahn's testimony. So obviously they know how explosive it can be.
They can't stop it. Now, Trump could say to one of his staff, "You're not going to testify." And they say, "Yes, sir." McGahn's no longer in the White House. McGahn's gone. McGahn has already openly cooperated with the Mueller team. He has nothing. There's no reason why he would not go testify to the House, as far as I can see it. He could be the most damning testimony. If the Democrats are smart, this will be prime afternoon, lots of cameras, full-blown Watergate-style testimony to give. And it will literally dominate the airwaves as long as it's on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Nadler has already said this will be public testimony. So I know that we can't wait for that at NarativLive, Zev.
And not to put too fine a point on it in terms of differences between McGahn and Cohen, one is a felon and one is a lawyer of noted. I guess Cohen is a lawyer too, but not in the same way. So, but he's not a felon in that case, McGahn. So it's an interesting contrast you're making there. It's going to be fascinating to watch that take place. And I think it and the Mueller testimony, which is also coming up soon, will be must-watch television, internet, whatever it is, whatever device you're using. It's going to make everyone stop and look and listen. And I think it'll change the narrative. I think more and more people are going to get convinced of the story of Trump's guilt as they listen to all this testimony live.
I think I agree with you on that. I think the difference with Mueller is going to be is whether or not he can answer all the questions.
Right.
Because he wrote the report, he may have to say, "I'm sorry, you will need to refer to the report. I'm sorry, you'll refer that question to the Justice Department." So there is not a man that's more a stickler for rules and what he's allowed to discuss and what he's not going to discuss. But that's what makes it so surprising. He also could unleash a grenade, an answer that literally just says, again, they're going to ask him, "Do you believe the Attorney General's 4-page summary was an accurate distillation of your report?" "No, sir, it was not." So there's answers he can give that are very simple and short that would speak to millions of independents, moderate Republicans, conservative Democrats that might see, Mueller. I mean, he really is. He's the Lone Ranger in this. He's the guy that went in and put on the mask and the gun and went in to enemy territory and spent, 2 years knee deep with his staff going through all of this material. We have 400 plus pages. And I think what he did, as I said, is he has teed up the House to continue the investigation in areas and ways he could not. And then they have the power to either bring articles of impeachment to the floor, pass them by majority, and then toss it into Mitch McConnell's lap.
And even more than that, Mueller has been after Trump for decades. I mean, this is not just something that showed up in the last couple of years. He was the director of the FBI as Trump was part of the big Russian organized crime that was infiltrating America. So this is not something new. It's a lifetime of them trying to catch Trump and his associates. So it certainly is very pointed. And you're right, he's been able to go into enemy territory. And I don't think he's going to give up until he's won. And my money's on him winning, personally. Let's take a look at another question related to Watergate, because this came in from Boomer Geek. You sort of touched on it, and we did give you some advance warning on it. But Boomer Geek asks, in the Watergate Senate hearings, what was Nixon's approval rating before, during, and after? That's a really good question.
Well, as I said, and when Nixon took his oath of office in '73, and we also have the Paris Peace Accords in the Vietnam War, he's at 68% approval ratings. When the Senate Watergate hearings begin in May '73, it's when his approval ratings drop for the first time below 50%. Flash forward to October '73, when he tries to fire the special prosecutor and that entire legal team, his approval ratings fall below 30%. You can see that they're in the yellow graph. And then again, the bottom of his approval ratings is 24% when he resigns. The blue bar, you see 19% on the left, and then you see 57%. That's the bar that says what percentage of Americans believe he should be impeached and he should be removed by a trial in the Senate. So you can see those two begin to part ways. That is the danger zone. That was the danger zone for Nixon. The danger zone for Trump will be if his approval ratings and those that want him removed have that sort of split. Another factor that I think is very interesting was brought up today at lunch. Let's say this drags into the fall and in the spring during the primaries. If someone like Governor Kasich or Jeff Flake runs, you may see a lot of Republicans in the primary say, you know what, I'm done with this. So don't forget, Lyndon Johnson had a bad showing in New Hampshire in 1968. He didn't lose it, but an incumbent president was almost lost New Hampshire in 1968, and that was a signal that he was very weak going into this, and Johnson decided not to run. I don't think Trump's not going to run, but it would weaken him. It would force him to spend money. It would allow a Kasich or a Flake then to run as a third-party candidate and siphon off 4, 6, 8% of the vote, and that's it for Trump. He can't afford that loss in the popular vote.
Can I just throw in the mix that my governor, Larry Hogan, who is a Republican, is visiting New Hampshire, and there are some speculations that he might try to run in 2020 against, to primary Trump. So what are your thoughts on that?
Look, I think what the best thing for the parties is going through this identity crisis, the role of Trumpism versus sort of your classic sort of Reagan, Ford, Eisenhower, is that moderate, civic-minded, law and order Republicans go into New Hampshire, go into South Carolina, go into Iowa, and challenge Trump. Test the waters. And again, who gets in and who stays in and whether or not they get money is going to go back to that measurement you saw in '73, '74 about Nixon. Who approves him, who doesn't approve of him, and how many Americans believe he should be removed from office.
It's Governor Weld as well from New Hampshire is also running in a primary challenge, and he's incredibly popular in New Hampshire. I think is that New Hampshire that he was the governor of?
He was, yes. He also ran as the VP on the Libertarian ticket in the last election. I don't think Weld had much of an impact outside of New England. Kasich and Flake are the two people I would put on this. I don't think Flake will do it, but Governor Kasich of Ohio, again, former high-ranking member of the House Budget Committee, governor of Ohio, 1-2 terms. This is a guy I think that could really bruise Trump, and it's not a question of Trump losing the nomination. I don't think he will. Don't forget, 85% of Republicans approve of Trump. It's a question of him being bruised from the right, while the Democrats bruise him from the left.
Right. And, as you point out, these numbers are going to determine a lot of what happens in the primaries. And as these opinion polls start cratering, he's going to have to look around and see who his opponents are on every side. including the Republican Party. We spoke a little bit about what impeachment means in those terms of impeachment, but we also wanted to look more deeply into what high crimes and misdemeanors mean. And this is a great little piece of video that came from where did it come from again, Tracy? The Need to Impeach organization, which is Steyer's.
Yeah, and I believe that's Tom Steyer's organization,
Yeah.
Need to Impeach. And in fact, I want to point out this video was made before the Mueller report, redacted Mueller report, was even released.
So let's take a look at it. And also, if you'd like to continue to ask questions of Gary or of us, you can talk to us in the Periscope account, or if you like as well, on the Twitter account below this particular video. Let's take a look at this video.
Okay. The Constitution says that the House of Representatives can impeach a president if he has committed treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. High crimes and misdemeanors is vague, and it sounds really serious, like the president has to do some serious lawbreaking before we can even consider impeaching him. But that's not the case. High crime in the constitutional context comes from an old British definition that we mostly don't use anymore. It's an abuse of power committed by someone who took an oath of office, a person of high status. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a crime in the legal sense, which makes sense if you think about it. A regular person can get fired for lots of things that aren't illegal, and the bar's supposed to be higher for the president. In the 1800s, for example, the House brought up impeachment charges against 2 different federal judges for coming to work drunk. In Federalist Number 65, Alexander Hamilton wrote that impeachable offenses arise from the misconduct of public men, or the abuse or violation of some public trust. So no, things like calling all critical press coverage fake news aren't crimes, but these acts destabilize our democracy and undermine public trust in the office of the presidency. Make no mistake, Donald Trump is a criminal, but his crimes aren't his only impeachable offenses. We need your help to remind Congress that impeachment is the will of the people, and that we don't need to wait for Robert Mueller's report to hold Donald Trump accountable for his many other impeachable offenses. Join us at needtoimpeach.com to get involved.
Nicely
It's
done.
a great little video.
It is. They did a good job of that.
You'll-
It's just, sorry, I missed that. You muted there for a second.
Back to quoting Hamilton and the idea that the historic British term being essentially abuse of power, someone high in office.
Yeah, it is fascinating to me that Hamilton became such a hit when it became such a hit, because it sort of prepared everyone for this incredible process that we're going through right now.
Hamilton's
Steyer's
old.
organization. Sorry, I missed that.
Real-
There's a weird thing happening on the phone that I think whenever we talk over each other a little bit, we lose what you said. So I'm just going to ask a more general question about Steyer. That kind of movement that he's got, where he's asking for the will of the people. Do you think that the people know that? Do you think that people know that they have so much of a voice in this, or do they still feel so powerless after a Trump presidency?
I think right now people's faith and confidence in that the government will do the right thing or in their elected officials is so low that they don't feel that they have a lot of will. So I think in moments like this in U.S. history, people look for the heroic figure, someone that sort of steps up and does the absolute right thing at the right moment. And right now, we don't really have anyone doing that. I mean, Trump seems to come from central casting for the villain, and the question is going to come up and inspire people that their will is being reflected in the actions of their public officials.
Joe Biden, Thursday.
Thursday.
Maybe
that may be
the
a
guy.
game changer, I hope.
And he becomes number what, 19?
He does become number 19, but of all of them, he's probably the most likely to succeed. If you're going to put him in a yearbook photo, he's got the most, the pedigree and the credentials to do this, and I think appeal to Middle America, the industrial belt, the rural belt, and he's done this before, almost, and he's certainly been a senator for long enough a time to be able to bring everyone around. Who else is there in this race that you could think of?
Well, I think if you look at, I think at this point in American demographics for the Democratic Party, because Hillary Clinton had fewer women votes than Obama did in 2012. So if you look at minority votes and you look at women, the Democrats have got to mobilize non-white voters and women in large numbers to vote, and also the youth vote. Those are categories that Obama did very well in. I can't imagine a ticket that does not have either a woman and or someone of color on the ticket.
Right.
Now,
Right.
VP or president, I don't know. But if Biden were to get the nomination, let alone Sanders, and that would be a whole different ballgame, I would probably put my money on Kamala Harris as the VP. But
You were saying that the other day, Tracy. That was your
I
pick.
was saying that.
But Democrats are romantic, and Buttigieg is the romantic role that we've gotten in previous elections with Bill Bradley in 2000, Paul Tsongas in 1992, Muskie in, was it 72 or 68? So there really is only about 5 or 6 serious candidates in the pool, and they'll thin out quickly.
I think
Can
so.
we go back to what you were
I-
saying just a minute ago about energizing the woman vote? I think that some of the worst policies that have come out of this Trump administration go right to the heart of women. And I think you're going to see those women come out like never before after seeing so many of these policies.
Especially with healthcare.
I hope you're right. What gave Obama the election in 2008 was typically college-educated suburban white women in places like Philadelphia, Charlotte, Richmond, Denver. So in these places where they really were critical votes. So I think you're right. I think that the female vote has got to be reflected in a party that speaks to their issues. And, Hillary Clinton, I think, was, this is a person that had been politically assassinated for a quarter of a century as first lady, senator, and then secretary of state, and as the first female nominee. So the Democrats from this pool, I don't see anyone being, quote unquote, arriving as a damaged candidate. The person that I think that actually could be treated the way Hillary Clinton was is Warren.
I totally agree. And Zev and I have had this conversation.
I'm just so impressed by Warren's policies. I mean, maybe it's too geeky, too wonky for the world, but every day she seems to come out with a policy that's reasonable and sensible. And she has an incredible track record of actually implementing difficult things in the Senate. And it would be unfortunate if she didn't get a real shot at this, because her policies make so much sense. And I also think
it's
she's facing a lot of
unfortunate,
headwinds.
but it's not just policies you need to beat Trump. You need charisma. You need so much more. It's not just about the policies, unfortunately.
She's also been bashed by him a lot. I mean, she's been at the brunt of the Pocahontas things and all this other camp from day one. She's been his target. So he's been going at her for a bit, and maybe she's suffering a little bit from that. But it's unfortunate not to see her climb beyond the single digits there, where all the men seem to be climbing so easily. Not all of them, but certainly Buttigieg, have you said? But there's certainly it does seem to be like a discrimination going on. Maybe it's in the way the media is covering it. Maybe it's in the way the voters are perceiving the threat. But it doesn't seem like everyone's getting treated equally.
She's taking the worst misogynist abuse she's been taking since Obama wanted her to lead that new credit bureau.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
credit bureau. I agree with you. In terms of sheer knowledge of policy and having real solutions that help middle and working class, she really has the best platform. But to a certain extent, people also fall in love with narrative, biography, charisma. And so it's how do you find someone? And Obama seemed to just hit that right on the head.
Absolutely.
And he also needed to find something to distinguish himself from Hillary Clinton. And that was, I was never for the Iraq war. Now, where Warren may actually cut her teeth is she's the only one right now saying impeach him.
Right.
And
that's a really good segue, because we're about to show you the candidates from last night.
She's not the only one out anymore. It took about 24 hours.
But they were all on, 5 of them at least, were on the CNN last night. We're in a town hall debate that featured open conversation about a bunch of issues. But what was really interesting was how they lined up on impeachment. Let's take a look.
There is no political inconvenience exception to the United States Constitution. If any other human being in this country had done what's documented in the Mueller report, they would be arrested and put in jail.
I believe Congress should take the steps towards impeachment.
I think he's made it pretty clear that he deserves impeachment.
But Democrats on the campaign trail are just as divided as they are in the House, with some worried that impeachment could actually benefit the president politically.
If, and this is an if for the next year and a half, going right into the heart of the election, all that the Congress is talking about is impeaching Trump and Trump and Mueller. What I worry about is that works to Trump's advantage.
Others sidestep the question.
If the House brings the impeachment proceedings before us, we will deal with it.
So interesting. And you're right,
Can we
Warren
just
was
talk
the
a minute
first
about
out.
the fact that Bernie Sanders is not a Democrat? I just needed to say that.
We can go ahead, talk about it, because I find it fascinating how I mean, I felt like he was lining up behind Trump there.
I mean, no, he's an outsider.
Yeah.
He was the outsider that was willing to challenge Hillary in 2016. He carved out a populist message that was from the left, and Trump carved out a populist message from the right. And Robert Reich wrote a book called Aftermath in 2012, and it was about the 2008 financial crisis. He said, if you do not solve some of the core problems for the working and middle class, we're going to have a populist revolt, and it'll either be class-centered from the left, or it'll be national, racist, xenophobic, centered from the right. And I think that's really where Sanders and Trump, if I put them on an historical stage, I mean, it would have been the first time in U.S. history that two populists would have run against each other had they been the two-party nominees. But I agree, he's not really a Democrat. He's never been elected. He has never been elected to any public office in which the solo word Democrat is next to his name on the ballot.
Yeah, and I find he's, there's a study being done about how close the people on the far left and the people on the far right often are very similar. They're often concerned about the very same things. It's often working class issues. The way they approach the solutions might be different, but they're all sort of organized on a national scale, the solutions, and they're policies that are sort of impossible to ever really achieve, but they sound good. And so there's maybe not that much difference between a Trump supporter and a Sanders supporter, and they both like each other. They both say nice things about each other, which I always find kind of fascinating.
Well, the Russians, they were onto that too, because they pushed all of those candidates in the election as well.
They did indeed. So this is going to be interesting. I see Warren's, the one who's leading the charge on the impeachment. Buttigieg also gently put his toe into the waters there about impeachment, but he's still being a little resistant. Something else he said last night did strike me, and he said that it's okay that he doesn't articulate his policies yet, because what he's articulating now are his values, and that is probably exactly what Warren is not doing. She's not been able to let herself be a human. She seems almost like she's buried in policy and in wonk talk a lot of the time, and maybe we need to see more of her, of the real Warren, who's fantastic. Who's got an incredible charisma.
That's the best analysis. Buttigieg is basically having the country admire and respect him as a person, his biography, and how he got here. And Warren is talking about policies, and I think you're right. You have to. Democrats want to fall in love with their candidate first, then basically kitchen table issues. And there are a lot of successful candidates that sold narrative. FDR sold recovering from polio. Bobby Kennedy was a master of making the public fall in love with them. And Obama was creating a narrative that Hillary, like Warren, was incredibly smart. This woman knew policy cold. She was one of the hardest working senators, but she couldn't get voters to embrace her from a position of personal warmth. And so I think you're both right. I think that the candidate
she did win the popular vote. So let's not forget that. She did get more votes than Trump.
The Electoral College, whole different ballgame. That's another issue. It won't change unless we get a supermajority of the states to do that, and it won't happen. But I agree with you. I think Warren would be a problematic candidate because the horrific term Pocahontas is a term that is sticking to her, like lying little. Again, Trump is the master demeaning narrative, and I fear that he has been knocked on the mat and will never ever be able to get right back up and punch his hard back.
Yeah. So let's play a little game. A game we like to call Pelosi chess. So, as this is the timeline of what might be up ahead for everybody. Hearings are happening right now, an election, and then a new Congress. And for Pelosi, she's got to figure out, when do you pass the articles and when do you have the impeachment trial? This is one scenario. You could do articles, do hearings right now, go into articles and impeachment before the election. This speaks a little bit to what the person on Periscope was saying. Or you could do this version, which sort of puts you articles and hearings before an election. The popular vote happens. a referendum on President Trump, on people have been hearing during those hearings, and then you get the new Congress, and now you have an impeachment trial if Trump wins the election. So in this second scenario, you have two kicks at the can of getting rid of Trump, where in the first scenario, you just get one kick at the can. What are your thoughts on that?
I haven't thought of that. That's actually pretty interesting. The first candidate with the ballot box. If you don't, what you're suggesting is then the new Congress in 2021 could visit issues of impeachment and make the on him.
Yeah. So you end up with two opportunities. And I think the people want to speak first. At the end of the day, people are going to want to vote on this because it's just necessary. I think we all have an opinion. And then if that doesn't succeed, you could still hold his feet to the fire. So if he does come back into power, you might have even a better chance because the Senate, you might have won some more seats in the Senate if there's such a popular movement of voters in 2020.
Well, the one issue in terms of fatigue is whether or not, here we are approaching, we're spring of 2019. Are voters still going to be talking about this in January, February, March of 2021? In other words, if Trump is reelected, that in essence is the voters saying, whatever you've done, we're handing you the presidency again.
Oh, he's got plenty of time to keep us talking about everything he's doing. So I don't even think that's going to be a problem.
You're right, because he's still in power, still doing all this incredible corruption. Every time you look around, he's doing something else that could be impeachable. It might not even have to be Russia anymore. We might be onto something else like the tax evasion or any number of things. But as long as he's in power, I think you're right, Tracy. He's going to keep us talking forever.
He doesn't know how to shut his mouth, and this is worst nightmare because he says incriminating things against himself all the time. I mean, watching the candidates frame this, there's a real pull from the base. I think Zev, you're saying this. They want the House to do their job. They want them to pass an article of impeachment, a minimum on obstruction of justice. I might add in abuse of power. And then that can has been kicked to the Senate. And if the Senate doesn't do anything about it, then the question is whether impeachment sent to the Senate tees up the Democrats better or if it tees up Trump better.
Right.
And that's a $1 million question.
That is a very good question. Because in fact,
I think it's a good question, but I think they're two separate issues. One is doing what is constitutionally right for the country, not based on any political, what's going to happen in 2020 if we do it leanings. I think they are two very separate issues, and we just can't keep linking them together.
I think you're right. They're two separate issues, but the way they look, I think they're going to go to impeachment anyhow because the movement is towards that, and they have to do it, as you point out, constitutionally. But it's when they do it. Are they going to rush it through before the next election, or are they going to let it build into the next election as the defining issue for 2020? And then it really just helps figure out which candidate is going to be the most successful candidate, because it does mean that the candidate in 2020 needs to be able to prosecute Trump Russia pretty well in all those debates, because that will be what everyone's talking about if they've built this 18-month long narrative around it.
My hunch is you're right. I think the House will pass an article of impeachment. They'll do their job. What you're saying is this moral imperative. And then, of course, the issue is that if you get inside Pelosi's mind is we could do the moral right thing, and then the consequence could be to let Trump win the reelection, to not be removed from office in the Senate and the White House for a second term. It will not be a second trial. This is a one-shot thing. If Trump is impeached and it fails, I don't see even a new Congress coming back and trying it again.
Can't do it. Once he's won that vote, he's won that vote. So it's always better to wait till afterwards because it gives you keep the advantage if he does win again, if that off chance that he wins again. Now you're right; it'll frame both sides will be able to say this is a reason to vote. But let's be honest, he's only got 38% of the vote right now. After a year and a half of what's going on, he'll get less, and there'll be a much more formidable showing by Democrats in 2020 than there was in 2016, just because there's so much at stake this year.
And Democrats did well in Wisconsin and Michigan in the midterms. So the state, again, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, Trump isn't president.
Yeah, exactly. It's very, very hard to see a path to 270 without those two states or any of the other sort of borderline states, which you just can see swinging to the left just because of the nature of the candidates and the policies that they'll be presenting. This has been great, Gary. Thank you so much for joining us. Believe it or not, an hour's
thank
passed.
you, Gary. I
It was
know,
so much
right? I
fun.
mean, the three of us could just like keep talking forever, but I'm not sure anybody will want to watch that.
Well, we'll hopefully get to do it again. And I'm sorry, we had a little audio issues along the way, but I think we got through most of them okay. And we're very thankful for your time. And welcome to Narrative Live and our team here. We'll certainly have you up again in the future. And thanks to all our viewers and followers who have been submitting questions on Twitter and on Periscope. And Tracy, any thoughts?
Yes, I want to say, I know that there were plenty of questions that I missed on Periscope, but bear with me. I was trying to get to as many as I could, as long as everything else we were doing during the show. And secondly, please don't forget that you can donate or subscribe at primosocial.com/NarrativeLive. It's the only way we're going to be able to keep giving you these broadcasts and writing on narrative.org. We really, really need your support. Thank you.
And we'll buy Gary a coffee for his time tonight as well. So, thanks very much for joining us, and have a good night, everybody.
Good night.